Good morning. My
Good
name
morning.
is John Laine, and I'll be teaching tonight's class. I normally teach at 9:30 on Sunday morning to the elder group during the first service. If you have any prayer requests, you can go to www.fbclakewood.org or go online to worship and fill out a prayer card through the internet, and it will be taken care of, and the church members will pray for you. I guess we need to do an opening prayer to get started. So, most gracious Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the beautiful day that you've given us. We thank you for the opportunity we have today to be in your house and to study your word so that we can glean the wisdom from it and apply it to our lives. We ask, Father, that you be with those people in our family here in Lakewood and around the world that have problems with all the troubling times we've got in the nation and around the world. We ask all this in your Son's most precious name. Amen.
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 Today we are in Proverbs, a new book. What do you know about Proverbs?
It's in the middle of the Bible.
Written by King Solomon.
Okay,
Yeah.
and it is probably in the middle of the Bible.
Just about it, yeah.
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 What's it about, though?
A lot of wisdom.
Wisdom.
Ah, wisdom.
Yeah.
That's a word we don't use much around here anymore, is it? The knowledge of God and the knowledge to live wisely are interrelated. Next to the knowledge of God and salvation, the knowledge to live wisely is the most important kind of knowledge. Godly knowledge is more than information. It is about transformation. You can be factually right, but spiritually wrong. Solomon's argument in the book of Proverbs is simple. Godly wisdom is applied truth that leads to transformation and wise practical living. How would you describe the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Don't all speak at once.
Wisdom is knowledge.
Well, knowledge is having a lot of facts and figures and that kind of stuff, information, whereas wisdom is like the application of it.
Using
Knowledge.
that knowledge.
Huh?
Using that knowledge.
Using the knowledge, right,
Yeah, I've seen a
in
guy
a godly way.
that had
Yeah,
knew a lot, but could not wisely make a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Second person.
yeah, don't point fingers.
Well, what you're saying, you can have knowledge but not wisdom.
Right.
Well, I pretty much think that's what Solomon's going to tell us right up front.
Yeah.
Knowledge is facts, information, data, and skills obtained by a person through experience or education. It's something we learn.
Right.
Wisdom is the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment, the quality of being wise. I went to Roget's Thesaurus to get synonyms, and I pulled up knowledge, and wisdom was listed as a synonym for knowledge.
Makes sense.
But I went to wisdom and looked for synonyms, and knowledge was not included with wisdom. You can take whatever you want out of that, but I mean, it's that fine a line between knowledge and wisdom.
Right.
And King Solomon's a perfect example when we look at his life. We all know that Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs, and according to 1 Kings, he wrote 3,000 Proverbs. We don't have 3,000 Proverbs in Proverbs. And he also wrote in his spare time 1,005 songs, of which they have one left that they can find. The first 20 years, Solomon practiced that wisdom. And he he gets us started right away in verse 7 with, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline." Where do most people live today? I think we're in that, we despise wisdom and discipline.
Yeah.
I mean, this last week clearly indicates discipline is out the window.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And wisdom is not far behind. And there's absolutely no fear of the Lord in our country at the moment.
That's true.
Roger that.
No respect.
You know, we don't have respect, we don't have discipline, we don't have obedience, we don't have any of the things that Proverbs is telling us we should be living by. I mean, just if we don't do anything other than verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. We're all fools. Don't mean to step on toes, but we're all fools.
Or at least we have the beginning of knowledge.
We have the knowledge.
The beginning.
We don't have the beginning of wisdom yet.
No. Beginning of knowledge.
So we get, I mean, if we don't cover anything else in this lesson today, verse 7 would be more than ample. Wisdom is a starting point. It begins with a relationship with the Lord.
Amen.
How many of us are professors saying we have a relationship, but when we look at the action, it's obvious there's no relationship? I mean, isn't it in Hebrews where he called us professors? So, how do we get to wisdom? How do we find wisdom?
Studying God's word.
Well, through a relationship, I believe also, with the Lord. Walking with the Lord and being taught by the Holy Spirit.
I think that this is per Warren Wiersbe, I think there is a formula to wisdom. Wisdom equals knowledge plus obedience. Solomon had all the knowledge. He always knew what God wanted him to do. He just didn't do it. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing the right thing to do. Wisdom is actually doing it. That's why I think the big idea that runs throughout the book of Proverbs is not just getting more and more knowledge, which is the easy part. Instead, it's choosing to apply that knowledge in ways that honor and please the Lord.
Right.
The wisdom is seen through an obedient life.
Don't we get the knowledge and the wisdom by listening to the Holy Spirit?
Well, that can't hurt us. If it directs your action to employing the knowledge in a wise manner, yes. Solomon knew what he needed to do. As we go through Proverbs, we'll see that the first half of his reign, which was about 40 years, he was wise beyond years. But then at the end, he kind of started drifting away. Not kind of, he drifted away. You think of all the things that Solomon knew what he needed to do to please the Lord because God had given him a wise and discerning heart. That's in 1 Kings 3:12. But he chose not to obey. He didn't drift away, he chose to go away.
Well, he didn't follow direction.
Yeah, well, that's willful disobedience.
He was told not to put other gods, and when he married all the different women, and he started worshiping their gods. That's where he really messed up.
Well, yeah, that's one of the many things that he really messed up on. I mean, in 1 Kings it tells us, for instance, that Solomon, his kingdom was secure. It would not be invaded. He would not have war in his kingdom. So why did he build a massive army? Why did he build massive fortresses around Jerusalem?
Interesting.
That's the difference between a foolish person and a wise person. Fools just blow off what they know they should do. But a wise person turns knowledge into action. James says the same thing. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. James 1:22. Frankly, I think Solomon should have asked the Lord not only for wisdom, but also for the desire to be obedient. Let's take a quick survey of Solomon's life and try to discover where he went wrong so we can avoid making the same mistakes. As I have studied Solomon's life, I have discovered 3 specific sins that led to his demise. Solomon's first sin was that he did not trust in the protection of the Lord. God forbade the kings of Israel from accumulating horses and chariots because those could lead a king away from trusting solely in the Lord as his protector. The king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. Deuteronomy 17:16. But Solomon disobeyed the Lord. The Bible tells us that Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. Instead of trusting in the Lord to protect him and his kingdom, Solomon put his trust in himself and his army.
Yeah.
Does that sound like people we know?
Yep.
Sound like those of us in this room? Solomon's second sin was that he did not trust in the promise of the Lord. Solomon built up a large number of fortified cities, such as Gezer around Jerusalem as major defensive outposts to defend against any Philistine attack. He also fortified Hazor north of Jerusalem to protect the city from northern invaders. And he fortified Megiddo in order to protect a major trade route that connected the plain of Sharon and the seacoast to the valley of Jezreel. In addition, according to 1 Kings 9:16 and 17, Solomon fortified a number of other important cities. So as you can see, Solomon was building a defensive perimeter around his kingdom to protect the city of Jerusalem and all his interests. Now here's the ironic thing. Solomon had no enemies, because God had promised his father David that during the reign of his son there would be peace. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace and rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. His name will be Solomon, and I will grant Israel peace and quiet during his reign. 1 Chronicles 22:9. God had promised peace during Solomon's reign, so why did Solomon feel the need to fortify cities around his kingdom? Simply put, it was because he did not trust in the promise of the Lord. It's the only conclusion I could come up with. Solomon's third sin was that he did not trust in the provision of the Lord. again, the Lord forbade the kings of Israel from marrying foreign women and from amassing large amounts of wealth. That's in Deuteronomy 17:17. But Solomon ignored these instructions too. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, according to 1 Kings 11:3. Having wives of royal birth was Solomon's way of creating alliances with all the other nations around him in order to secure the peace, and the 300 concubines made it clear that Solomon was a ladies' man. He was also incredibly wealthy. And that's all the thing most people remember about Solomon. We made movies about Solomon's gold.
Yeah.
Looking for Solomon's lost gold mine. And according to Ecclesiastes 2:8, he said, I amass silver and gold for myself. Again, Solomon did exactly the opposite of what the Lord instructed him to do as the king. He, the king, must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Now you tell me, are these the actions of a wise man who is applying his knowledge to a lifestyle of obedience and brings honor to the Lord?
No.
Or are these the actions of a man who is foolishly trusting in himself? Whoops, did we step on toes there? Suffice it to say, Solomon did not practice what he preached. He did not apply his knowledge to a lifestyle of obedience. And as such, he suffered the consequences. But we can learn from Solomon's example. We can practice what he preached in the Proverbs and learn from his mistakes. Be obedient? Is that something that our culture embraces anymore?
Oh, really?
It's a lost trait.
It's a very lost trait, isn't it? He amassed amounts, as the pastor was saying earlier, he amassed huge amounts of wealth. I read in one of the commentaries that he was amassing, this is in the 1970s, so 50 years ago, in the dollars of that day, he was amassing about $328 million a year in income. That's pretty good. That would almost pay for the stimulus package today.
Yeah, I was gonna say. And he didn't pay taxes on it.
Yeah, or he paid them to himself, and wrote it off as. Now, as we look through Proverbs, obviously we're going to look for wisdom. And one of the common words in Proverbs is instruction. It's used 26 times in 31 chapters. It's sometimes used as chasten. They've been chastened. He uses justice and right behavior frequently. And he uses fear of the Lord 18 times in Proverbs. I think he's trying to tell us something.
It's interesting that he wrote so much about that and about obedience, us being obedient to the Lord, but it was directly opposed to what he was living.
Well, the first 20 years he was good.
Yeah.
It's the second 20 years that he went downhill. Why? I don't know if it actually says.
Listen to all his wives.
Well, I personally, this is from John A. Baptist and not John the Baptist. Having 1,000 women in your life is probably not wise. One's bad enough sometimes, or it's too much. But 1,000, it's really deep.
So he wrote Proverbs in the first 20 years of his reign as such, and then did he just automatically flip a switch and go wild and crazy, or was he gradually
Well, he
walking away all that time?
I don't know when he wrote his portion of Proverbs, because he didn't write the entire book of Proverbs. Hezekiah is credited with writing 3 or 4 of the later chapters, and then there was 2 other people that wrote 30 and 31. So we have 4 people that are identified as writing Proverbs. Probably the first 26 or so were Solomon's.
But once he started acquiring all these wives and concubines, his attention went from serving the Lord as it was in the beginning, where he asked, when God asked him, what is it you want? And he asked for wisdom. More than money or power or fame. But it was after that he got in that disobedience where this sin allured him. When we read the rest of these verses, I don't know if John's going there or not, I may be skipping.
We're going.
Okay, is that, he's talking about how don't betray your father's instruction, and the way that the whole Israelite education system was set up was the mom taught them about the heroes and about the Bible, and dad taught the skills, and when the son became old enough, and so that he left that because he desired these other things. And as John said a minute ago, is once you get all these foreign wives and the foreign gods and the foreign cultures and the foreign practices in there, where do you find room for the true God? As what I see in his life, in reading it.
As Phil said, verse 8, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and don't reject your mother's teaching. For they will be a garland of favor on your head and pendants around your neck. The garland of favor is that wreath of branches, whatever it is, that they used to put around the victor's head when he won a race or something in the Olympics. Remember, the Greeks were big at that. And my son, if sinners entice you, don't be persuaded. Well, there's one he should have listened to. If they say, come with us, let's set an ambush and kill someone. Let's attack some innocent person just for fun.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, that's what I
Sounds
was.
like the riots.
Let's swallow them alive like Sheol, whole like those who go down to the pit. This was written 2,700 years ago, and it could have been written last night.
Yeah.
Last week.
Yeah. We'll find all kinds of valuable property and fill our houses with plunder.
Oh. First your trunks.
Throw in your lot with us and we'll all share the loot. Now, tell me, this is me asking, it's not in the Bible commentary, why would a man who's the richest man in the world want to go and plunder somebody else's wealth?
Just a little bit more.
Well, he was also saying this as a warning to
Yeah,
his son. This is what they'll tell you,
Yeah.
right.
but ignore it. But he definitely had an eye for the loot.
And the women.
And
My son, don't travel that road with them or set foot on their path, because their feet run toward evil and they hurry to shed blood.
Feet run.
He had the gift of foresight.
It is.
He is seeing today. It is useless to spread a net where any bird can see it, but they set an ambush to kill themselves. They attack their own lives. What is he trying to tell us?
Their own demise because of their actions.
Yeah. We are going to pay there's going to be consequences for our actions. I mean, let's be real. We're forgiven, but we still have consequences, don't we? And unfortunately, in today's culture and society, those consequences may not be necessarily just from God. They may be from our society too. Such are the paths of all who make profit dishonestly. It takes the lives of those who receive it. If that doesn't sound like 21st century America, I don't know what does.
Yeah, the world owes us a living.
Yeah, that seems to be the prevalent thought today, isn't it?
Uno one.
Entitlement.
Yeah. In what ways have you experienced God's grace by seeking His wisdom? Getting back to verse 7. In what ways have you experienced God's grace by seeking His wisdom? Nothing in your life has you've ever changed your actions because of the inspiration from God?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. When my dad told me to do a chore on the farm, I had the wisdom to know I better do it or I was in trouble.
Or you go get a stick off the birch tree and come looking?
Even though I could outrun him, I couldn't do it.
I know when I joined this church in 96, summer of 96, Melinda our youngest, was heading off to college, the last one. And her college, Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, was a very expensive school. About $26,000 a year. I was a postal worker at the time. I was not a churchgoer. I was only a Christian because you had to put some religion on your dog tags when you were in the military. So I put down Protestant because that covers everything except for Catholics, right?
Jewish.
Yeah.
And Tina kept telling me that we have to give 10%. And I would look at the checkbook and how much I was making, look at how much I had to pay for Melinda's college, and I said, well,
What a foolish woman.
her education was more important than giving money to the church, you know. So those first couple of years, that first year, he gave a small portion. But by the end of the first year, we were starting to give more. The second year came around, we filled out our FAFSA again. For those of you who are familiar, it's free application for federal school assistance, which means your child can get grants if they're lucky, or they can get student loans.
If you're lucky.
Yeah. Well, we told her she was not going to get any student loans for the 4 years. We were going to pay whatever we had to pay to keep her from getting the loans. Well, interestingly enough, the tuition went up the second year.
Oh, what?
And my FAFSA percentage that I had to pay surprisingly went down. That's purely a coincidence, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
So by the start of the third year, we were given 10%. Third year, tuition went up again. Our percentage of FAFSA went down even further. And it proceeded like that for the fourth year too. So by giving the 10%, by obeying what we knew God wanted us to do, we saw a significant improvement in our lifestyle.
Found out you couldn't outgive God.
Yeah. No matter how much college cost, we couldn't outgive them. And then for graduate school and then law school, which is another 5 years, we made it through everything, you know. So I know for a fact that if I'm obedient, sometimes it wasn't so cheerfully obedient, I must admit. But if I'm obedient, God will provide. And He did. We could see physical proof that He did. You know, it's why Solomon left, turned away, nobody knows. God knows. And I'm sure that somewhere down the road, if He wants us to know why, we'll find out. Why would anyone accept such an invitation to go out and rape, plunder, and pillage? What does the invitation say about the way that sin works in a person's life? These protests that we've seen the last 2 weeks, couple weeks, during daylight hours, they're peaceful protests.
Well, they're starting to break in at daylight.
But as soon as the sun goes down, and you can't see their faces real clear, it becomes a riot. They plunder and they pillage. Why? Why would you, you know, I won't get into the fake news networks, but because that'll get me into trouble.
Or you only be telling us half the news, half the story.
Yeah, but it's the half they want us to hear.
But going back to your question is that, what was the question again about sin?
Why would anyone accept such an invitation? What does the invitation say about the way that sin works in a person's life?
That sin rules that person's life.
Right.
Drags you
You
down.
know, if the invitation is there and you give in to the desire, that means that somewhere along the line you've lost your first love, and you've taken your eyes off of
Christ.
yeah.
Well, it also kind of, I think it works like quicksand.
Yeah.
You start out, and it's a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, before you know it, you are in,
Over your head?
over your head, yeah.
The more you try to get out,
And
the
then,
deeper you
yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Well, and you don't even try to get out, I mean, you just, whatever you get from sinning, it's that it will roar or thrill or whatever it is, it entices you into deeper.
What's the old saying? You know, sin will take you farther than where you want to go, keep you longer, which it costs you more than what you want to pay, and it keeps you longer than what you want to stay.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
It is.
That's like that.
And it looked so good at the start.
Well, yeah.
That's like that water outside of Anchorage, that bay.
Mhm.
That looks so pretty, but you go out in there and
Oh,
the
yeah.
sand grabs you.
It's like quicksand.
And it holds you. You can't get it away. Now they have, after 50 or 60 years of learning what to do, they put water in the hose and move it away from the sand. But before that, you went out, that was it. Lo siento mucho. Yeah.
There was a saying on a church billboard many years ago off of 56th Street. It said, if you and God have drifted apart, who moved?
Yeah.
Solomon, who moved?
Mhm.
And if you moved, why? How do we apply this? I mean, the object of Proverbs is transformation. That's where the wisdom comes in, is the transformation. How can the Lord use you to warn someone about such a self-destructive path?
Well, some of us, or most of us, can just use ourselves as an example. What we used to be, and what we are now. Taking that first step.
Well, unless you're from the South and was saved when you were a baby, you have a testimony that's going to help.
People weren't saved so much in the South? Or they were saved at an earlier age in the South?
Right, so.
The Bible Belt?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like Cece said, you've got to be, if you're a good example, how can the Lord use you to warn someone about such a self-destructive path?
The reason I know that is because when I went to Glorietta, they wanted to do a testimony and they're asking everybody when they were saved, and they were everybody 5 years old, 6 years old, 8 years old. Then they came to me and I was 21 years old, and they go, "Oh, an old sinner."
An old sinner, huh? I was 48.
Yeah, you're older.
Me too.
Yeah. Pastor baptized me Christmas Eve of '96 here.
Oh.
I think you, by living an example for others
Others.
on what to do and sharing your life with others on your experiences, can help them omit doing the same thing.
And really, you can only warn them.
Yep.
Your own children especially, you don't do that, you will, there's a consequence for what you're going to be doing, what you're thinking, where you're thinking of going. Don't do that. And sometimes they listen, and then sometimes they don't. And when they don't, then they have to learn the hard way. And then you can use that, okay, now, this is a good example, that you need to understand that some people have already gone through these things, and you can be wise to listen to their counsel.
They can walk you around those holes, those pits.
But the beginning of it all is in that first verse we read tonight. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord, it starts with having a relationship with the Lord. So if you don't have a relationship with the Lord, then you've got no beginnings of having any knowledge and wisdom, and then you're going to continue to desire that sin and not desire the good that God gives us.
There's no rudder on your ship to guide you. You just go wherever the tides go, you take you.
There was a boat in the Bible that was like that,
It was.
if I recall correctly. I read a topical study of the fear of the Lord. Just a couple minutes. In 1945, the chief of the federal government's Office of Scientific Research and Development said this concerning the notion of using rockets to deliver bombs. Such a thing is absolutely impossible, he said, and it will remain impossible for many, many years. People have been talking about a 3,000-mile high angle rocket shot from one continent to another, carrying an atomic bomb directed to be so precise that it would land upon a city.
Yep.
Technically, I don't think anyone in the world knows how to do such things,
Yeah.
and I feel it will not be done for many generations to come. 12 years later, the Soviet Union successfully test-fired the first intercontinental ballistic missile. In 1839, a doctor wrote this: "The abolishment of pain in surgery is an impossibility." Knife and pain are two words in surgery that will forever be associated in the consciousness of the patient. To this compulsory combination, we shall have to adjust ourselves. He said this 7 years before anesthesia was introduced. An inventor of the radio said this in 1926. Cece will probably remember this.
I do.
Sure.
While theoretically television may be feasible, commercially and financially I consider it an impossibility, a development of which we need waste little time thinking about. Fortune magazine in 1938 said this: few scientists foresee any serious or practical use for atomic energy. They regard the atom-splitting experiment as useful steps in the attempt to describe the atom more accurately, but never as the key to unlocking new power. This is from the Scientific Quarterly of 1825. What can be possibly more absurd than the prospect held out of locomotives traveling as fast as stagecoaches?
Remember that, don't you, CC?
Yeah. Even Charles Darwin, whose theory of evolution has been embraced by our society but is increasingly being questioned by the scientific community, shifted in his understanding of evolution. The single college degree Charles Darwin held was not in biology, it was in theology. Shortly before his death, Darwin said this: I was a young man with uninformed ideas, and I threw them out as queries and suggestions. To my astonishment, they took off like wildfire. Toward the end of his life, he suggested to a Christian friend that she speak to the servants, tenants, and neighbors. What shall I speak about, she asked. Jesus Christ, he replied. What else is there? Even Darwin questioned the very theory that has made him so famous to this day. In light of this, is there any place we can solidly build? I believe there is. I want to look at a statement made by an individual who was considered to be the most knowledgeable of his day. In fact, he is one of the most knowledgeable men of all time. His name was Solomon. It is no wonder that 1 Kings 4 tells us that people literally came from around the world to hear him talk. He was an ichthyologist, a botanist, a zoologist, and a biologist. He wrote 1,500 songs, over 3,000 proverbs. He was an extensive writer, a brilliant thinker, a very wise individual because God had answered his request for wisdom. What did this extensive writer and brilliant scholar say? Turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, and further by these, my son, be admonished. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Ecclesiastes 12, and 13. According to the wisest man who ever lived, the fear of the Lord is the beginning, the foundation of knowledge. The question then becomes, what does it mean to fear the Lord? Hebrews 11 gives us an answer with Noah. Why would a man in the middle of a desert spend 100 years building a boat if he didn't fear the Lord? Questions? Maybe no answers, but nothing? Well then, let's get Cece to close us out with a word of prayer.
Father God, we do thank you, Lord, for the day. We thank you for the lesson that we have just heard on Proverbs, Father, on the fear of the Lord and the beginning of knowledge. And Father, thank John for giving such a great presentation. And Lord, we just need to take that, the words that we have written here and follow them, Father. We don't need to go into Solomon's later life. We just take what's written here and just observe and make that as our motto and our life pattern. Again, we thank you for this day. We thank you for allowing us to be in your house and to receive this message. And it's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, CC.
You have to